Hey, what's up you guys, the Curious Owl here, and today I have my July 2021 wrap-up. So July was a really good month for me. I had finished a lot of books that I was not expecting to. I ended up actually completing my D20 TBR that I had set for July, which was really good. However, I did have quite a few moments where I was a little bit more slumpy than I think normal, but overall the month was pretty good. And you know, even the slumpy parts of my months in the last several have been fine because truthfully I've been in like weird mental health spirals every now and then that I felt comfortable not reading for like a couple days at a time and then coming back to it. So I've honestly just been really listening to myself and my body and my mind and really taking the breaks I need, which I think has been helping me a lot more with the books I have been working on. First of all, let's go over the stats though for July. So in July, I completed a total of 6 books, which were all physical or ebook. I actually had no audiobooks this month, which was really interesting.
Hi, Editing Gabby here. So I said that there weren't really any audiobooks I listened to, and a couple of times in this video I talk about how I listened to the audiobook as I was reading. So the way that I basically do this is if I have a physical copy or ebook copy and I get the audiobook from like Audible, Overdrive, or Scribd, essentially what I do is I use the audiobook as kind of my more method of reading because a lot of times I listen to them while I work, but I do track them in case of the physical or ebook. So I basically just track it under one of the other versions as opposed to the audiobook because it makes the most sense in my head, and that's easier to track most times because a lot of times with the audiobooks the minutes can get kind of crazy. So I figured that, you know, especially because I will tend to flip between the versions, whether it's the audiobook in the physical or the audiobook in the ebook, it's just easier for me to track it under one particular version that I already have as opposed to just tracking it under the audiobook. So I hope that makes sense because I do talk about a couple of times listening to the audiobooks either as I'm reading it or while working or something. So just to alleviate that confusion, I track it under one of the physical or ebook copies, but I do listen to the audiobook.
But to go over the stats, we have 2,304 pages read, and because I didn't listen to any audiobooks this month, I had 0 minutes worth of audiobooks. 5 of the 6 books I read were physical copies, and 1 was an ebook, and all of them were books from my personal TBR as opposed to being borrowed. So as far as star ratings, I had 2 5-star books, 2 4-star books, and 2 3-star books, as well as 1 DNF in the month. So 3-star or above, not too bad. There were a couple of things I was not super invested in, and one of the first ones being the first book I completed in July was Realmbreaker by Victoria Aveyard. I was actually kind of disappointed with how this one turned out because I was really excited for when this came out. Now, that being said, it wasn't a bad book by any means. I think that there were just a lot of points that felt really drawn out that I wish would have kind of been condensed. And honestly, a lot of this world was more so, I guess, world building than anything. I also feel like there may have been too many main characters involved in this. I think I would have preferred there to be 1 or 2 at the very most, the second one being kind of a character that I think really helped to understand the villainous side of things is all I will say. Like that person and then the main character, who I don't even remember her name at this point, they should have been really the 2 main perspectives because I think that they would have provided a really interesting hero versus villain kind of story. Not to say that the other perspectives weren't at all endearing and that the characters by themselves weren't interesting. I just feel like for some of the characters, their perspectives weren't necessarily needed, and I feel like that, if anything, was what did drag out the story way too much. And I think this is kind of something where Victoria Aveyard truthfully went to take this story and take like the structure of the politics system that was involved in George R.R. Martin's Game of Thrones and kind of put her own spin on it. That is truly what this book made me feel like, which, don't get me wrong, I really like Game of Thrones. I really like that as a political fantasy very, very much. But I think that the way that Victoria had told this story was a little bit too much to chew on for a first book in a series. I don't know necessarily if that was the point, to give so much of the world and the politics like right up front. I kind of just feel like this first one could have probably been cut down a little bit, or at the very least, not have as many characters as perspectives. So this book essentially is like this story of a girl who's the daughter of a pirate queen who ends up, finding out that she is also the daughter of this really powerful, like, old, ancient, not god, but kind of god almost. Like, there's some kind of interesting powers that she's supposed to develop, and she gets pulled into this adventure with a bunch of other people who are either from her lineage or from like her father's world, that are saying she is going to be the key to bringing down this big bad guy that you see at the very beginning of the book, who's kind of the main villain. He's coming in to destroy the world, and you have like a bunch of random people that seem to get together. Two of them were fighting together to defeat this bad guy in the beginning, and one of them is this young boy who he is like the squire of one of the fighters. When his knight ends up getting killed in this big battle, he is told to take this sword that is super important and is the twin of the bad guy's sword and protect it. And with that comes like a lot of issues in terms of like talking about honor and family and doing what's right. But this character seems to have some weird things happen to him, and he's not sure like what to do. And then you have another character who's kind of this elf-like character who was one of the fighters that this squire kid was fighting with, and he is like trying to rally up his group, who essentially the elf-like characters are not really that invested in going after this big bad guy. They would much rather kind of take themselves and run off. But the problem is that the reason that they're in this world is because they were left here by accident, and this whole thing, this whole fight could end up taking them back to their home world, but they're not willing to do anything about what's going on. And so like there's this whole political aspect with his group, and then you have the entire actual human political system that's involved in this, that does in some way take from the squire's story, where the queen, who is very young, she's like 16 or 17, she's supposed to basically get married, and she's not really sure whether that's the right thing, but it is something her father had wanted when he had died for her to do. But he said specifically that she is to choose who she marries. She has the ability to choose who it is she marries, and that comes with some other things about honor and, doing the right thing for the country, that kind of thing that plays into it. So as far as the main girl, who's the daughter of the pirate queen, she's kind of just along for the ride, which I feel like that was one of my biggest issues with this, is I feel like with her being kind of along for the ride and just being like, I'm going to rebel against my mom because she won't let me do anything because she's trying to protect me, and so I'm going to go off with this random bunch of people I just met and try to save the world. That's kind of the whole premise of her entire story. I don't know. I feel like this is something that when I was reading it physically, I wasn't really interested in it. I checked out the audiobook through Scribd. That was making it a little bit more enjoyable, and I really liked kind of the way that the ending of the story went, to where I would be interested in reading the second book when it comes out. But I do think this is something I'm going to have to reread at some point, because for a lot of it, I was just very lost with the threads and everything. So for now, it's a 3-star. It has the potential of, I think, being a 4-star in the future if I can reread it and maybe understand things a little bit better. But as you can tell from my rambling and my confused looks throughout the entirety of talking about this book, I just was very, very lost for very much the majority of the book. The next book, though, that fared a little bit better was the third book in the Dark Tower series by Stephen King, The Wastelands. I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars, and I do have a reading vlog review for you guys to go check out if you would like to. But the long and short of it is that I really liked this. The books in the Dark Tower are actually getting steadily better. So far, this is my favorite of the 3, and currently I am working on book 4, Wizard and Glass, which honestly is so far now my favorite of the series. I am liking Wizard Wizarding Glass, so much more. It has the potential, if the next half of it goes as well as the first half of it did, to be a 5-star at the end of August, but I'll have to let you guys know how that fares in my August wrap-up. And then the book that I actually ended up DNFing this month was The One Memory of Flora Banks by Emily Barr. Now, this is a young adult contemporary that talks about this girl named Flora Banks who, ever since she was about 10 years old, had developed this kind of amnesia where, if anyone has seen the movie 50 First Dates, where there's the character 10 Second Tom, Flora is kind of that person. Her amnesia works where multiple times during a day she reverts back to like her 10-year-old self and has no memory of the things that had happened before that, and she's essentially a 10-year-old girl's brain living inside the body of an 18-year-old. And with that comes some pretty weird things, because what happens is that she ends up kissing her best friend's boyfriend, who is leaving town the next day to go, I think, off to Sweden or something, some kind of like Northern Europe thing, and they're based in like England essentially. And through this, though, this whole thing causes a whole chain of events that does essentially start from where Flora is actually able to remember the conversation and the kiss that she shares with her best friend's boyfriend. And this causes a lot of things where she thinks that there's something really special about that and she wants to go chasing after this boy. Now, I would say I DNF'd this about a third of the way through, because honestly, the more that I read it, I just got so freaking irritated. I hated this so much because, for one, I feel like that the best friend's boyfriend was really preying on Flora. Why else would he follow her to a beach late at night, leaving his own party? And he, at the beginning, when they share the kiss, he's like, you should come with me to this place where my parents aren't gonna be and stay the night with me. And I just felt like that was so slimy and disgusting right off the bat. And Flora being unaware of what is happening and the fact that there is such a thing as a boy preying on somebody is completely ignorant, is completely blissfully unaware that she basically was being played and could have very easily been raped. And imagine being in that scenario and then all of a sudden having her mind wiped. Like, think of like if she was in the middle of having sex with this kid, like her mind just goes over and she wakes up, in a sense, in the middle of having sex with the boyfriend. I just found that to be so disgusting that about a third of the way through, I couldn't take it anymore. That image was so stuck in my head the entire first third of this that by the time I got to that point, I was just, I can't read that. I just felt like that entire sequence of events and that sequence of thoughts I had that stuck with me for most of the first third of the book, I couldn't justify continuing it, because honestly I was kind of afraid of what was going to happen, because I had a good idea that essentially what would happen is she'd go and meet this boy and he would kind of just break her heart, and I was not willing to put myself up through that. I really wasn't. And also I felt that while the character is kind of in the mind of a 10-year-old, if that is something she's able to remember, why wouldn't she tell her parents? Why is that something that is a secret from them? She told her best friend, and that causes a massive rift. There were so many things in terms of like the logistics and the logic surrounding around this entire event that I just felt dirty reading this. I felt like this was not in any way how I think this story should have gone, and it just made me feel so uncomfortable for a lot of it that I just ended up being like, screw this, goodbye, we're done. Not doing that anymore. The next book, though, I completed and was my first 5-star read for the month was Skin and Earth Volume 1 by Lights. Now, I am a huge fan of Lights as a music artist. If you've never listened to her music, I would consider it something like EDM, pop, and Lights' voice is just so very unique, and her sound over the course of her career has changed, and I really like this because not only is this a graphic novel, but it is accompanied in the actual text of the story with playlists and songs that are essentially to help tell the story of this world. This is set in kind of a post-apocalyptic dystopian kind of society where you have your main character, who is this redhead right here, in the likeness of Lights herself.
Editing Gabby here again. I really butchered the first time trying to explain what this graphic novel is about, so let's get into it. So basically you have the main character, N, who is a part of this lower class society. The way that this dystopian society is set up is that you have this group of people who are kind of the workers. They're the ones that are the slaves in the plants, that kind of a thing, and then you have everybody else who is above them, the more richer people, the more political based people. What happens though is you see that she has gotten involved with this guy that she really liked, and then he gives her this tattoo, and immediately after is like, I can't be with you anymore. And so she gets really upset. She doesn't know what's going on, and she's visited by this woman who she also ends up having a relationship with, in a sense, who shows her why this guy is so bad. And that's kind of all I can say without really spoiling much. So definitely would recommend you guys check it out if you would like it. And I think the playlist, or at least the album that is created surrounding around this entire graphic novel, is really well done. I wish it was not a standalone by any means, because although the ending makes it seem like there could be something else involved in it, I don't think Lights is going to be coming out with anything else regarding this story anytime soon, because it's been now almost 3 years since this has been released.
The next book I completed was yet again a little bit of a disappointing read because it was only a 3-star, and that was Evercross by Elizabeth Chandler. This is the 4th book in the Kissed by an Angel series, and I do have a reading vlog review for this as well if you would like to check it out. But long and short of it, this is essentially the second part to the 6-book series, because the first 3 books that I had done reading vlog reviews for were, you know, from one storyline. This is picking up about a year after the accident that Ivy gets involved in Kissed by an Angel. There's a lot that's going on with this story from an emotional standpoint, because Ivy, now coming up on the year anniversary of Tristan's death, is grappling with a lot of emotional issues. She misses Tristan still, and then as she's been dating Will, she's been kind of comparing the two of them a lot, and it's been causing a massive rift in their relationship. And on top of that, there is this mysterious guy that comes into play that Ivy's not really sure why she's attracted to him, but she's becoming very attracted to him very quickly. And that's kind of the whole point of the story. And there's a lot of like other mysterious dealings that are going on that you're kind of unsure about, but there's this really nefarious presence that is coming up through this that is kind of disturbing, and it could cause even more problems than what are already happening in this. And so it's unfortunately, though, my least favorite so far of this, because I just feel like it should have just been longer. I mean, I'm going to say this for most of these books, and honestly, I feel like for the majority of this, Ivy was just being perfectly stupid, and I talk a lot about that in the reading vlog review if you would like to go check out that video. The next book that I read was Sabrel by Garth Nix. Now, I gave this a 4 to 5 stars, and this is actually a retry of this, because I think I tried to read this almost a year ago, maybe, and I, for some reason, couldn't get into it. I don't know what it was, but I ended up actually picking up the audiobook through Audible, and I really liked it. Now, one thing to keep in mind, the audiobook is narrated by Tim Curry, who I love. He's one of my favorite actors. I love his voice, and so that made the story that much more appeasing. I also realized how much more adult this book was than I thought it was. I think that was a really big disconnect for me with this, because I thought this book was supposed to be like on the verge of middle grade to young adult. This is very much a more adult book, because not only is the main character like 18 years old, there's some like sexy thoughts running through here that I don't think normally would be brought up in YA. And this is, I think, coming up on 25 years. If it hasn't passed that already, I could be completely wrong. It's probably older than 25 years, but this is like the first book in the Abhorsen series, which deals with a young woman who, after graduating from essentially her schooling and before going on to apprenticing in her father's trade, which is being essentially kind of like a necromancer, they call them Abhorsen, finds out her father is actually missing and is either dead or dying, essentially. And she, throughout the entirety of this book, is on a quest to go find him. And because though that he is now missing, she is now the Abhorsen because of the fact that she has to take his place. She's destined to take his place. And so because everyone knows that he's gone, she's kind of the one everyone looks to save the world, because what's happening is that the dead are coming back to life and are wreaking havoc on this world. I really liked a lot of this. I just felt like a couple of times I might have got a little lost, which is totally fine. It happens. Because of that, I don't feel like I quite understood what the trajectory going forward with these books are. I don't really know. I feel like I kind of lost a lot at the end of it, which is okay. It's just I might have to go back and re-listen to a little bit of it, but that's more than okay. But not too bad. I really liked it and would be very interested in continuing with the series. And then the final book that I read in July that has got to be now one of my most favorite books of this year is You Will Get Through This Night by Daniel Howell. Now, this is not necessarily a self-help book, but this is a book that talks about the 3 stages of dealing with mental health. And unfortunately, I will say Daniel Howell talks about how he has referenced a lot of doctors, or at least one particular doctor. In the acknowledgments, essentially, it does say that there was a particular doctor working on this as a psychological consultant by the name of Dr. Heather Bolton. Throughout the book, the one thing I wish that would have been done is there's no actual references to studies or footnotes of any kind that are references to articles or anything that actually talk about the things that Dan talks about. Now, Daniel Howell, for those of you that don't know, is a YouTuber still. I think he still does put out videos every now and then by the channel name Dan Is Not on Fire. And for years, he has been very open about his mental health, his struggles with anxiety and depression, and especially when coming out as gay in 2020, how that really affected a lot of his mental health, with having to keep that a secret for so long, and the things that he had experienced as he was getting older about, you know, his sexuality, and like then his mental health wrapped into that. This book essentially, like I said, plays into 3 different aspects, which it talks about the night that you're having kind of the anxiety attack, or you're having a really bad mental health night, where a lot of people would be really struggling, and especially if they feel alone, they feel like there is no way out of this bad night. So it talks about the night that you're having your problems, the next day where you start changing some habits and start realizing some of the things that you might be needing to do to help make those bad nights better, and then the days after that, the long-term goals, the things that you need to keep in mind as you're moving forward. And it really just a lot about, you know, how your behavior and the things that you do for yourself and the things that you do to hurt yourself, and they make those nights worse when you have those really bad anxiety attacks. Now, I am the first to admit that this is a book that I'm not going to remember all the time when it comes to when I'm having an anxiety attack, that I'm going to remember anything that was involved in this. But that's what I love about this book, is that when I had read it and listened to the audiobook, which was very funny on script, it's a very different experience, the audiobook, than the physical book. There's this whole thing though, in terms of like being able to look back at something as a reference, and being like taking the time when you're having a bad night to look at something like this. And remember that you're not alone, and remember that there are ways for you to help yourself. And while a lot of us that have mental health issues might not always have that on hand, this book made it very apparent that this could be something you could use on hand for, like, especially when you're having a really rough night, going to the first section and just reading some of the things about, you know, how your mind is getting into a crisis, and, you know, understanding that what you're going through right now, every person will go through many times, and you're not by yourself, and essentially just being kind of that friend that you might need when all else fails. A lot of times the way that I distract myself and help myself pull myself out of those bad nights is through things like reading. And this is something I think that, especially if I'm having a really bad night, I could turn to and just read some of the things that Dan talks about in terms of like his own experience with mental health, and understanding that like I'm not by myself. I'm not alone. I'm not crazy for feeling the way I feel. My feelings are valid, all those kinds of things. I just foresee this being a very comforting read and reread and reread and reread anytime I get into a bad spot where I feel like I'm probably not gonna be okay. And then being able to read the other portions of it the day after I have something bad happen where I get into a bad mental spiral. And then the day after that, reading the next part, you know, being able to then reinforce kind of these ideas about like learning what it is that I do to myself that makes it harder for me to get out of those spirals, and learning new ways to help myself with getting out of those spirals. That reinforcement and that repetition, the more times that I do it, the when I start having those bad nights, the easier it's going to be to get through those bad nights, because I'm going to always remember that I will get through that night. But those are all the books that I read in the month of July, with also Sabrel and Realmbreaker and the Wastelands. So like I said, total of like 6 books, 1 DNF, not too bad. Did pretty okay. I'm actually pretty proud of myself. So let me know what you guys ended up reading in July. Did you find the things that were really good? Did you find things that you didn't really like? Thank you guys so much for joining me in this video. If you guys did enjoy it, please do give it a big thumbs up. And if you're not already and you'd like to be and would like to see more content like this, go ahead and hit that button down below and subscribe to become an owl in our flock. And I will see all of you guys in my next video. Bye guys!